All right, welcome everyone. This is Brett, Pleasure of Doubt, with another Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A. Our guest today is Frequent Voices with Verveki, Dialogostician, is that a word? Andrew Sweeney. Thank you, Andrew, for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew's a writer, teacher, musician, podcaster, rabble-rouser, and he says he's in service of goodness, truth, and beauty. So Andrew, we've seen you talk a lot with John on you have a bunch of conversations on your channel and John's channel, but you rarely talk about you. So I actually don't know that much about you from listening to these conversations. So I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your journey, and how you've come to meet John and get involved with this meaning crisis project that we're all working on here.
Okay. Well, I'm a Canadian expat living in Avon, France, which is a suburb of Paris. Um, I'm I studied at McGill University in literature, and I've always been kind of an amateur writer. And for most of my 30s and 40s, I wrote songs. And then, as social media kind of evolved, I became a blogger of some kind and got a bit of a following on Medium um, uh, for various articles I wrote, and discovered John Vervaeke, around the time when Jordan Peterson was huge. Had an immediate connection to him, to his ideas. I've been practicing in a school of Buddhist Tantra for a while, so I'm familiar with Buddhism, and but I've also studied, comparative religion quite a bit, and philosophy. So of course, I sort of ate up John's work because it seemed to converge with a lot of my own interests. And when he put out his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, I figured the only way I could really digest it, or get it fully, because of the technical nature of a lot of it. And I'm not a scientist. My background is more in literature and philosophy, so I don't know anything about cognitive science, but I know a few things about art and literature. I thought that I would write about it, and I did a series on Medium. I wrote about 16 essays, and each essay was based on three of the series, three of his videos, and I tried to sort of condense his ideas in a way that I could understand. So, and communicate his ideas in a way that would make them more accessible to a lot of people I knew who perhaps would get bogged down by the more technical aspects of the series. So I thought his series was important. And I wanted to help him promote it on some level. And then I got into a discussion with him, and I found him to be a real mensch. Is that the right word? Mensch, a real sweet guy. And then I also did a letter series with Christopher Mastro Pietro. Um, uh, which was suggested by Peter Lindbergh, and I sort of connected to Christopher also, and I'm finding that the discussions I am enjoying are trialogues, right? The deal with three people, and I'm finding that is an interesting dynamic in terms of my discussions with John. But I'm a teacher here in Paris. I teach media, and I think that's me. I'm just an all round online sort of troublemaker, and, as I say, rabble rouser, I hope.
That's great. Thank you for that. And you mentioned you're a musician. Now we chatted
Mhm.
beforehand, and if we have time at the end, I think, and your sound is okay enough, we may get a song out of you, a song or two out of you today. Uh, so
Sure.
so that's very exciting. So you have a YouTube channel, and
Mhm.
you seem to have talked to a wide variety of people on this channel. How would Can you tell us about your channel?
Well, yeah. I've again, it's a channel. I put them first out on YouTube, and then I put them in podcast format. And I have actually two podcasts. One is with a gentleman named Alexander Bard, who's a philosopher from Sweden. And I started sort of doing a podcast with him. We're going to have a talk with John in a couple of weeks, the three of us. And also a guy named Zach Stein. Basically, what I'm trying to do right now is have really deep conversations, and in a trialogue, in a three-person format, because I find there's a nice dynamic with that. So my YouTube is mostly conversations with John, with Alexander Bard, with John and Christoph and Zach Stein, and a couple other people like Bonita Roy and Jonathan Rosen. I have quite a few people, but I'm narrowing down my guests so that I can go into depth with the people I'm already enjoying talking with, rather than interviewing a wide spectrum of people, because I find it more like a little bit different and more enriching than just like an interview format.
So what does the meaning crisis mean to you?
I think the meaning crisis people have been talking about it for a long time, since probably Nietzsche. Since probably Nietzsche declared God was dead. I mean, if there's one place where the meaning crisis starts, it's probably in Nietzsche's declaration that God was dead. In the present time, I think the meaning crisis has to do with the transformation of the human person in the age of internet and social media. So it starts off with, let's say, the separation of the death of Christianity in a way, and then the scientific worldview coming online, and then that being corrupted, and then just an all pervasive, feeling of meaningless that pervades people who are without roots, let's say. The philosopher Simon Weil in French calls it déracinement. There's lacking in roots. So I think a lot of people feel very, very rootless, and I think that we're moving from a very sort of, we're moving from this sort of Western Christianity into a nomadic world, and we're kind of going forward and backwards at the same time. And I think we're in transition. So I think the meaning crisis is all the things that John talks about, like homelessness, domicide, this sort of let's say scientific reductionism, a lack of understanding what is science, and a lack of understanding what is religion, and then a lack of philosophia, he calls it. So a lack of understanding of philosophy either. So we just have this world that is very left brain oriented and propositionally oriented and politically oriented, and that is sort of unaware of its own deep meaning roots. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
You follow that?
Yeah, and now you have a really great YouTube video with John, really focusing on the religion that's not a religion, and I encourage everyone to go listen to it, because they really have a very down to earth conversation about it. So John is capable of having these conversations on so many different levels, and sometimes it's very high level. And I find when he was talking to you about the religion that's not a religion, it was very down to earth. So I think it's a great way for people to get up to speed on it, on John's views of it. And we here sort of feel that we're sort of part of the process of crafting the religion that's not a religion. There's a lot of discussion we have going on what it might look like, what structure might be. What do you think of the religion that's not a religion, and is it an answer or part of an answer to the meaning crisis?
Well, I think that John is very clear that we need religio, which means we need this meaning-making community, and we need we need what he calls psychotechnologies to be able to connect with meaning, because a lot of the technology is sort of reduces us to a lot less than what we are. And I think he acknowledges that religion allows us to connect with a deeper sense of meaning, that's been lost, and that a lot of people cannot connect to any kind of religion anymore, and they feel on one hand they feel really happy and gleeful that religion is over, and somehow that they're free, but in a way there's still this enormous hole, right, in people's lives without that, because it has to be acknowledged that the religion creates community, and also the lack of this metaphysical basis of the Western society makes us shallow and consumeristic, so again, it's this notion of God being dead. It's this notion of when God is dead. Nietzsche said that we'll never wipe the blood off our hands. So we've tried to kill God, and we spent the whole 20th century trying to kill God, and in a way God sort of comes back. Like we seem to need this principle in some way, but then other people like John, or in the Buddhist tradition, is a non-theistic tradition, would argue that there's also a non-theistic possibility, and I think John's view is that we should go beyond theism and non-theism in some kind of a way, and that maybe is the religion that's not a religion. So we don't have the supernatural aspects of religion, and we can include science without a problem, but we also have technologies which will expand our consciousness, get us into flow states, get us into communitas, get us into communion with each other. In our discussion, I was defending tradition because I practice in a tradition, and sometimes I feel I don't want to advertise that to people, and other times I feel it's important just to say, okay, I'm going to stick with a particular tradition. On the other hand, I understand I don't have an answer to that question of whether we need a tradition or not, or whether there could be a post-religious tradition or a religion that's not a religion. I don't have an answer. In fact, to me, it's more like a question. It's more like a koan. I don't think the secular world satisfies me on some deep level fundamentally. So there is an aspect, perhaps a disagreement there, but perhaps not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm for one.
Are you there?
Yes. Can you? Oh,
hello.
Sorry, I was muted. I muted. Sorry.
No worries. No worries.
So
I'm just, because of our sound problems earlier, I was afraid that I was talking into a void.
Okay. No problem. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, for example, I'm one of the nuns who abandoned the belief in God at a young age, and in doing so, I also let go of the community aspect and the psychotechnology aspect, the ritual aspect of the religion, and I guess I'm feeling that gap. So I think certainly for someone like me, something like the religion that's not a religion is strongly appealing, and I think that's a big group of who John's talking to, us nuns. So we've got some questions. The first question is from Mark, who wants to ask about the relationship between the meaning crisis and music.
Oh, interesting question.
Well, I think he might want to frame it more, but so or Mark, did you want to did or was that it?
Yeah, no. Give me some framing if you could. I'm Mark Lefevre, Andrew. Nice to have you here. Yeah, it's I've heard some of, but not all of your talks with Vervaeke and especially Christopher, and they're very lovely, and I'm glad that you do that work. So the thing that I sort of sense, and maybe incorrectly, but I sense that every time there's an opportunity in there to talk about the psychotechnology aspect, or the aspect of what we can do about the sort of meaning crisis that I think you have framed quite well, by the way. You seem to slip in music, and th- music for me sort of touches on the symbolic as well as the ritual as well as the communitas. So it's a big, and it's a big part of the religions, right? So it's a big part in essence of religio. So I wanted to give you a chance here to expand to us on how, like, if you were just to I don't actually like doing this, but I think it's important. Like, if you were to put a music lens on and see the meaning crisis just through that, I want you to just sort of freeform and expand how that interacts with the meaning crisis.
Okay. What came to mind as you were speaking was, I read a lot of Nietzsche in my 20s, and Nietzsche said that life is not worth living without music. And we know that a lot of what is put out there as music is not exactly music. It's sort of a substitute for music in a way. And then there's music, which taps into something probably even deeper than language, I would say. I would say music goes deeper than language. It is a language in itself, right? It is a symbolic language, as you say, and it's a language of meaning, but it's a language of meaning that doesn't require words or in a sense, or if it's a song or something like that, it's mythopoetic, and the propositions are deeply connected to our embodied feeling. So there's a kind of feel right now, because people are in such a language world. There's so much texting and language everywhere. It feels to me there's so much noise, verbal noise, and so much of music is actually noise, that that people have a hard time to connect with music in the way probably they in the meditative way that they used to at one point, right? Also because we hear a lot of compressed music, coming through, computers and MP3s. It's very compressed. It's like, it's music that doesn't breathe, that doesn't move, and it's music that's designed to give you a hit, right? Give you a sensation, give you a pop song is a formula. It's 3 minutes long, and it's like an orgasm, but something that is a bit more sophisticated takes you on a journey with it, not just the peaks, but the valleys, the ups and downs of life. So I think music will always be the creative spirit will always need to express itself in music. It can't do otherwise. So there always will be music, and great music out there. But I think I was thinking the other day about how we're living in a time of, part of the meaning crisis is there's too much of everything, right? There's an excess. So you have to decide what is meaningful and what is not. Whereas before, I guess you would save up your money to go to a concert, or there'd be even further in the past, there would be special events where you would go and hear music, and it would be like an important special event. It wouldn't be just this thing that you put in the background to distract you from your own sense of meaninglessness. So music is the way we form meaning. I think music is the way the soul forms meaning in its most refined sense. Perhaps painting as well. It's a different. It's all vibrational. It's a fine vibration. So yes, music is a remedy to the meaning crisis, but it also requires, I think, real music. We have so today. So I think the creation of music needs to be stepping outside of noise and going into silence, and then music can emerge. The meaning. So when you talk about the meaning crisis in its relation to music, I think as the meaning crisis is noise, and music is the fine signal in the noise. Is that I don't think I'm answering your question, but is that something to work with, or is that something?
No, that's really excellent. You put a lot in there, and I just as a quick, hopefully follow-up. So, I mean, in some sense, I in
That's not me, by the way.
Not me. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry. Since you're sort of implying that in order to proper in a way that will assist the meaning crisis in general, we need to have a deeper, less noisy environment, especially within the music environment, and that helps to maybe tune the psychotechnologies that John is talking about. Is that something like what you're implying?
Well, the psychotechnologies perhaps will open us up to the music. Like, for example, for me, meditation is like a hygienic necessity in a noisy world, right? So practice of meditation always, to me, I have always meditated. I mean, I've meditated for a long time, and I find that music emerges from those states of meditation. And I think that just like they had to invent sports and gyms because everybody was living in offices, right? I mean, working in offices. So they needed, people started jogging and going to the gym because you need to move your body on some level. In the same way, because we have so much noise and distraction, meditation becomes the psychotechnology. The basic psychotechnology, I think, to help us with the meaning crisis. John would say music and music and some kind of movement also, which I agree with. But the point is really to get into a state where of receptivity, where you can actually hear the world. You're not just hearing the noises in your brain and the noise inside and outside.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to have to chew on that quite a while. You've given me a lot to think about. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's a really great question. Yeah, I'd like to talk to John about that. Maybe I'll bring that up with him in our next discussion.
One thing we're playing around with on this forum and some other forums are ecstatic dance parties. We actually have one tonight, which is focusing on shadow dance. So movement activity to integrate the shadow aspects and sort of dealing with difficult energies such as anger, grief, frustration, loss. It's the first time we're trying it tonight, organized by one of our members. And so we're playing around with sort of the meditative aspects of music as well.
Yeah, and John was saying something about we do need alternate states. That's not the right word. Altered states. Sorry. Yeah. We do. We're going to go into altered states because we need altered states to break the framing, of our world, because it becomes dull and mechanical if we don't. So we can do that in a very unconscious, stupid way, right? Or we could do that in a ritualistic, kind of space. Sort of a safe ritualistic space where you can express all those dark energies, whatever, or light energies, whatever, in music and dance, and you can express trauma, and you can express all that, and of course that goes back to shamanism, and that goes back to the religion that's not a religion. It's actually, in my view, the religion that's not a religion is actually the primordial religion, right? in a sense, because we are creatures who are made to practice transcendence. So which we do in all of these ways, right? Through art, through, as you say, movement, through meditation, all those things. So I think movement. I think especially we need to express. Some people. Gurdjieff had this theory that we have three brains. We have our and the first brain is intellectual brain. So we need somehow to exercise our intellectual brain, and then we have the heart, and that's the feeling aspect of our existence, and we need to express and transcend aspects of that, and then we have the body, which he called motility, and the third brain, and that's movement. And so those three things are what make us human. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, anyway.
Excellent. Antalaxial.
Hello?
Yeah. Hi. So Antalaxial has a question. Thanks for that, by the way. What do you make of Vervaeke's critique of Romanticism?
It's romantic Gnosticism, has its darknesses and dangers. I think we need a certain kind of romanticism. And I sort of think we move between romanticism and classicism, and there's this kind of movement back and forth. The kind of romanticism he's criticizing is sort of the polar opposite of, let's say, scientific reductionism. So on one extreme you have scientific reductionism, which only believes in the propositional world, or the what can be measured and described in science. And then the romantics want to just smash all that and live for the self or something like that. And there is a decadence to that. But on the other hand, the romantics are very, very important because they open a whole new territory for human exploration. So I'm quite fond of the romantics. But I understand his criticism, of course. Perhaps it's because he comes from a scientific background, and my background has been in the arts, mostly, and in literature. So,
right. I think next question is David. You have a question.
Sure. So your work spans quite a broad range of different thinkers with regards to people like Peterson, Bard, IDW, and how does Vervaeke fit into that broader conversation? I'd say more specifically, what are his unique contributions to that broader conversation of meaning and religion? But also, what are the limitations as well that you see with his works, and also the religion that's not a religion?
Well, I wouldn't want to talk about his limitations. We all have our limitations in that sense to be critical, because I think his contribution is intense and full-bodied and important. I think with respect to people like Bard and Peterson, though, they're more or less like extroverted thinkers, and so Peterson was out there going for the guttural and fighting the culture war and that sort of thing, and I don't think John has a disposition that wants to do that. I think John is a very careful thinker, and he's a very respectful thinker, and I think Peterson and Bard paint broad strokes. They're more like Nietzsche. Nietzsche was supposed to philosophize with a hammer, and I don't think that's John's contribution. I think it's something else, and I think he's right. He's working on the meta meaning crisis as well as the crisis. So he's not directly engaging with political concerns or that sort of thing, and in that respect, I resonate with him because but I think there's different strokes for different people, different folks. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the question on romanticism is interesting, because I'm a romantic by disposition, by nature, and also I came from a very secular background, and then I became appreciative of spiritual and religious traditions, whereas he came from a very fundamentalist Christian background, and sort of saw the limitations of that, and moved. So his movement is towards rationality, and he's trying to expand the meaning of rationality, which I appreciate. But I guess I sometimes I want to defend the pathos aspect. The Bard talks about the let's say the mythos and the pathos, and he's very into the logos. John is very much about dialogos, and that's his thing. Not that he doesn't understand those other things, but that's his emphasis. And maybe other people have different emphasis. These other people you mentioned. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe
John.
I feel like you have an answer to your question, and I'd like to hear your answer to that question somehow.
Sure, I'll just be brief. I think that Integral was very strong in giving people who are religious or who are tied to those mythos and pathos to be able to bring that into a postmodern age. With concepts like the conveyor belt, with the three faces of spirit, etc. But what was missing was a way for people who are going to be more rationally secular minded to have a religion, and that's what I believe John brings to it.
Right.
Yeah, that was missing within the picture, right? So you have Integral and Peterson who are trying to update and revivify the religions up the different stages of development. But what about all the other people who are secular, who are in that rational state? Like, what can they do? How can they have a tap into religio? And that's what John brings. He people's minds who are of that sort.
Yeah, and he also has a dialogue with people who are religious. So he doesn't he has a semi-permeable membrane, so to speak. Like, he has his views, but he's also in a very graceful way willing to discuss that with a lot of people who do have who do practice religious traditions, and I think they can learn from him. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's like a bridge essentially, and if people want to get into, like, he's like a bridge and a gateway that people, if they want to, they can continue on to some of those other things I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So AK12 has a question. Oh, I keep on muting myself. Sorry. AK12 has a question.
Hey, Andrew. Been a big fan of your YouTube series for quite a while now. I started with the Alexander Bard thing, and I just didn't sleep for a week. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
My question's a little bit general, so you can punt it back if you want me to ask it more specifically. But I'm basically just curious about what you think about Vervaeke's whole psychotechnology thing, and if you've ever read Ted Chiang, the science fiction writer, kind of conversation augmentation, Sapir-Whorf, and tools for thinking, and their potential impact and role in this.
I'm not aware of those psychotechnologies you mentioned. What do I think of John's idea of psychotechnology? Is that the question?
Well, I guess it's just
or what psychotechnology he has to offer.
God damn it! Let me see if I can ask this more specifically.
No worries. I'm just not familiar with those guys you mentioned.
Okay, maybe if I start with an example and then expand it, that'd be easier. So,
okay.
Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is the idea that the language you use actually changes the way you think.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote a story about it, and there's a movie called Arrival involving aliens.
Hello. You've cut out there.
Can you hear me? So it's basically the idea. If you've seen Arrival, have you seen that movie by any chance?
Maybe. Yeah, I think so. Is that the movie with that big weird thing that is in the middle of a cornfield or something, and then these people kind of meet these aliens that arrive or something?
Exactly.
Like that? Yeah, I saw that.
So in learning the alien language, like she starts, like she changes. Like, I mean, it's a little bit fantastic. Her relationship with time changes. But I mean, I guess the prototypical example of this is there's this theory that Chinese people are better at math because 82 in Chinese is 810-2 versus 82. So it's a little bit easier doing addition because of the way you literally say the words. And so at least John introduced me to the idea that, like, thinking about conversation and language as technologies, as psychotechnologies, while everybody's just obsessed with self-driving cars and AI. And so I'm curious, if I frame it that way, like, what if you have any ideas or anything comes up for you in terms of conversation augmentation or potential psychotechnologies you think that could be very valuable or play a role in this crisis?
Well, I can the psychotechnologies that I work with are in the tantric tradition. So that's a whole rich area of and that's a big discussion. And also some yogas and that kind of thing. In terms of, I'm not a hyper technological sci-fi type. But I do think that well, yeah, I could say that I know a bit. Heidegger says that language is the house of being. So if you think of language as a house, as a place that you live, it gives you a different perspective of what language is, rather than just a way of communicating, a way of discussing propositions or passing information back and forth. It's actually the place you live. So that's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is that as we communicate, in this new sort of internet space, our language, the way we speak and think and talk is being morphed and distorted and changed and becoming a new kind of creature. So it is kind of like this woman meeting the alien, and then she changes. We're changing as we meet as we meet the first the technology, but then also the what's underneath the technology, the ideas and the software and the algorithms and all that. So we're changing. And I was listening to Jordan Hall talk about how it's like when you're driving a car and you're used to a car, used to how a car drives. You can shift the gears and you can go back and forth, and it's very smooth and simple for you. And then suddenly you have to drive in some other kind of vehicle, and you lose your dimension. You lose the sense of where you are. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're losing our sense of who we are and where we are. And I think working with language, at least in my own experience as a psychotechnology, through writing, through communicating, is much more important perhaps than we think. So I don't know if I've answered your question at all, but that's where it took me.
Well, what comes up for me when you say that is kind of like, I guess I would throw it back to you. Based on what you said, what do you think is the rate limiting factor on the impact of the psychotechnologies that you talked about, Tantra or language, in the way you write? Do you think it's
rate limiting factors? What's that? Limiting factor?
I guess what I mean to say is, like, in this kind of this trend of change, who could be who do you think could have the unlocking role or has the most important role now? Is it the tool builder? Is it the poet? Is it the proselytizer? Is it the teacher?
Probably the artist and the engineer. Those two things.
Simultaneously.
Yeah, because I think the machine is sort of taking over, like the I think we have to be more and more creative. And I thought of engineer because engineers build things, right?
But for example, how could an engineer be useful for the kind of tantra psychotechnologies you're talking about?
Well, they could engineer a beautiful space for people to practice tantra or something, or they could and that's the outer stuff, right? And the inner stuff, the artistic stuff is what I would call tantra. I do hesitate to use that word because it's been so abused. The word tantra often means it's sort of some kind. It's been so sexualized and all that, but what it really is the artistic working of energies in your body and in your relationships, and it's a very artistic process. So I would look to the artists and the engineers.
I'm a tool builder, so that's extremely helpful what you're saying, because I'm always looking for what is the complement and who to learn from. So thanks a lot, Andrew.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right. Sherry, you've got a question.
Yeah, hello. Just I'm looking for my question. Are you familiar with Owen Barfield's book, Saving the Appearances?
I haven't read it yet. I've been wanting to read Barfield, and because I've heard him mentioned quite a bit, and so I'm sorry I haven't read it yet. No.
Okay, well, you might not be able to answer the question, and that's fine. But do you see the meaning crisis as being a necessary evil?
Necessary evil. Ooh.
In the sense that it's a journey. It's leading us to a more integrated approach.
That's interesting. I was reading René Girard. Do you know René Girard? Have you ever read his stuff? He was when I was reading, and he was talking about the scandal, right? And how Jesus was saying the scandal is necessary, but woe is he who perpetuates this scandal, or something like that. I don't remember the exact thing. So in a way, it happens. It's necessary. This fall, this is in a way it's a deep theological question, isn't it? It's like the fall from Eden, right? This is how we become conscious, right? This is how we fall from Eden. We start to wear clothing and use tools and stuff, but we also suffer, right? And we also develop weapons of just mass destruction, and so we develop evil as well in the process. And so then we're in this situation. So necessary evil, I think it's just an existential situation. I don't think we could say necessary or unnecessary, but it's how it is. And then so we have to find meaning in this radically world that is driving us towards fragmentation and meaninglessness. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And if you haven't read it yet, you should.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
It's a great book. Yeah.
Is he the guy? Does he talk about angels and things like that? Is it, or is that?
No,
wrong guy. Okay.
He talks about. It's actually a study in idolatry.
I was thinking of Corbin, I think. Okay, a study in idolatry. Yeah.
Idolatry, yeah. Idolatry in the sense it's not really a religious book. It has a lot to do with language. Idolatry and iconic vision, being able to look through something instead of being stuck at it.
Interesting. Right.
And he has a theory of original participation in the sense that that's what the ancients were involved in, where everything the water they swam in was a metaphysical soup, so to speak.
Yeah.
I spoil it for you. But
I was just listening to this guy who has a podcast. Maybe some of you know him, Daniel. What's his name? Not Spechtenberger, the other one, the guy who has the Emerge podcast. Forget his name.
Daniel Thorson.
Yeah, and he just came back from a 75-day retreat, and he was saying that, the kind of experiences he had on those retreats, like he was describing some experience where he felt like he was being, stabbed by demons or something like this, and then he was having these, he felt connected to these, sort of celestial beings of some kind, and all these things were happening to him. And he said that he thought that it's like the Western world really does everything it can to either, let's say, make that experience trivial, make those kinds of experiences trivial, or make it so that we're so super saturated that we can't actually link to that metaphysical depth So again, when we're laughing or looking, at ancient superstition and religion, we have to remember that people had connections with and experiences with stuff that we can no longer relate to. And then we take a bunch of drugs, and then and then we go back to our, you know what I mean?
Yeah. He uses an example of the word pneuma, meaning breath, wind, and spirit.
Yeah.
So if an ancient person was walking through the woods and a wind blew on them, it was all three of those things at the same time. Whereas for us, our landscape has become somewhat flattened.
Exactly.
It's no longer three-dimensional.
Exactly. I mean, that's often why you would personify those things. You would personify the elements.
Right.
You would describe them as like female goddesses or something, or the air, wind, water, and you personify them because that helped you to understand the depth of them.
Right, and that flat.
And not to just see them, wind and water as being, water as being H2O or something, right? A bunch of chemicals but actually something that is, some angelic presence, or whatever you want to call it. In the Buddhist Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they call it dakini. So all the elements are dakinis, that means feminine spirits and things like that. But so those are psychotechnologies, which we laugh at, which we don't take seriously today, but
right,
perhaps we should.
Yeah.
But a lot of people.
And in the book, he also is really good at demonstrating. He loves language, and he's really good at demonstrating how language has flattened the landscape. So yeah, it's very good.
Okay, thanks for that tip. I'd like to read it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sherry. Yana, you have a question.
Hi. So I was wondering if you can say something about the role of art education in the meaning crisis, and how it might help and how it might be failing to do that at the moment.
Well, I think by giving kids a bunch of tablets or something like that, that's a big mistake. I think education has to be. Well, I was talking to Zach Stein about that, and Zach has an incredible book. I recommend it to everybody, called Education Between Two Worlds. What he promotes is what he calls the one-room schoolhouse, which would include all the generations, right? So one of the problems with our education system right now is I think that I think it's unnatural that kids are corralled into age groups, whereas if you put a younger kid with an older kid, you have this transmission from the older kid, and so for the arts, I think arts is Arts is the thing that people have been lacking with arts is, I would call it transmission. And I haven't thought too much about it or tried to articulate that, but that seems right to me. I know my daughter, she's 11. I went to this theater group, and they just had a bunch of kids kind of expressing themselves, right? There was no content. It was all just about being funny and cute and that kind of thing. So I think kids are lacking a metaphysical education. They're lacking probably a vertical aspect, whereas there's older kids and teachers and that kind of thing, and they're just being told to sort of express themselves. And of course, but they're not being taught actual arts, you know. I'm not saying that the self-expression isn't extremely important, but I think you need a long learning process. I was thinking of the painter Cézanne. You know the painter Cézanne? He was trained in the classical tradition, and at one point he just got fed up and burned all of his paintings. And then he created Impressionism. You know, he created this new kind of painting. And it looks like a postcard to us now. We can't really see how radical that was when it first came out, because there was no perspective, and you know, you could look at the Mont Saint Victoire from many different angles and see something different. So, but he went through that training, you know. So I think arts training would be, I think, is absolutely essential. Are just expressing yourself in an artistic way is, you know, nice and everything, but I have a feeling that there should be more actual arts education in schools, and that they should be they should bring back like history of art classes, so artists, you know, kids can learn about tradition. So I sound kind of conservative, I guess, when I'm talking about it.
No, I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nick,
it's conservative, but it's also radical. So it's like, because it's radical, because if you've read Ivan Illich's book Deschooling Society, you know, I really think that the school system is one of the big institutions that is collapsing and has to collapse, and that is perpetuating the meaning crisis, and that it has to be completely remade on some level, with a deeper sense of the arts, in terms of the embodied arts, let's say, art in terms of the body, also training the body as well as the mind, and training your somatic sense and your felt sense, and your meaning sense, in fact.
Oh, excellent.
I could say, I could react to this, but it's 4:00. I don't want to delay everything.
No worries. I have nowhere to go. It's the end of my day here in France, so I've already eaten. If anybody has more questions, I have time.
Go ahead, Yenna.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, it's an interesting topic to me, and I had this religious-y type of primary school where we did a lot of those embodied kind of practices, but then indeed it was that just express yourself without really integrating it, and maybe that's also has something to do with this romanticism that John is criticizing.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you have this very strict, this is what art is and how it's supposed to be, and like everything outside of that is not considered art, and I think we have to go somewhere in between.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because
Yeah.
I think modern art has something to say as well. I'm not suggesting we should go back to just classical art.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Nick, you've got a question.
Yeah, I had a kind of two questions. One kind of about Vajrayana Buddhism itself, and then the other about your relationship to it. I'm a little bit less familiar with Vajrayana than I am Mahayana and Hinayana, and was wondering if it would be fair to characterize it as a kind of theistic formulation of Buddhism. And then the other question is, I was wondering what attracted you to the Vajrayana form over the other two forms.
I would say that Vajrayana is not theistic, but it uses skillful means. It uses a lot of skillful means, which is called upaya in Buddhism, which appear to be theistic. But finally, the theistic aspect of it, the devotional aspect of it, you say, dissolves. But it's a process. So there's different, there's very many different stages. Like you, for example, in one stage of Vajrayana, you visualize yourself as the deity, as some kind of a deity. But and then you visualize you making offerings to a deity. So you're a deity giving to a deity. Which is very foreign, perhaps, to how we think of, Buddhism as some kind of rationalistic, I think that a lot of people, how they see Buddhism in the West is actually through the lens of Stoicism or Epicureanism or something. Whereas it's not actually how real, even Mahayana Buddhism it actually is. So I can see why why Vajrayana would be criticized as being a theistic form of Buddhism, but actually it's still grounded in the Mahayana in terms of philosophy. They always say that Nagarjuna, who was the great logician, right, of Buddhism, Nagarjuna, am I saying that right? He had a sort of limit at some point with his logic, and he went into Vajrayana because he couldn't get any further with his logic. With the propositional, he just kept deconstructing everything until there was nothing left. People think, the postmodernists are deconstructionists. They should read Nagarjuna, who deconstructs practically everything, that there is. I think Vajrayana is not a practice. It's not a practice that appeals to everybody. It appeals to certain types, perhaps, whereas other types, other people prefer Zen. I've done a lot of Zen. I started off in Zen as well, because Zen is a much more, it's a less, Zen you do one thing, and Vajrayana there's 84,000 different kinds of things you can do, and Zen you just do one thing. So that gives you the idea, a sort of, idea. There's supposed to be 84,000 different practices in Vajrayana, whereas in Zen there's, you just sit and you walk and you chop wood and you carry water and,
That's interesting.
So take your pick, whatever appeals to you, whatever you are, whatever, means something. But I think the tantric is interesting for our times on some level, because I think it's radical.
To some degree, it seems like that difference you highlighted between Zen and Vajrayana can almost be mapped onto Vervaeke's suchness and moreness.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's interesting as well what you brought up with I can't pronounce his name. Nagarjuna.
Nagarjuna?
Yeah.
I think I'm saying that.
Yes. In that deconstruction, and how the deconstruction seemingly leads him back towards a type of iconography. Which, I'm coming from a very bizarre Christian worldview, perhaps, where it seems like that type of thing. In some sense, it seems like one must deconstruct Christianity to get back to the icon of Christ. And I was wondering how much similarity there was in his kind of creation of or I don't know if practice of Vajrayana.
I read Matthew Pageau's book. Yeah, you know Jonathan Pageau, right?
Yep.
Probably.
Yep.
And I read his book, and it really reminded me of he was talking about the symbolism in the book of Genesis, and he described it almost like a Buddhist mandala or like the mandala of some kind, and a lot of the symbolism that I know from Vajrayana, I was seeing it through that, so that was very interesting for me. I know that the Christian Orthodox tradition, they work more with icons, and emotionalism, and that's and ritual and sort of colorful rituals and stuff. So in that sense, I had the feeling that the Vajrayana tradition had something in common with Orthodox Christianity. I actually wanted to talk to Jonathan Pageau about that, but he I don't think he likes Buddhism very much, so he didn't respond to that.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think we have 2 questions left. AK12.
Hello again, AK12.
If you'd indulge me again, Andrew. I don't think I could say it verbally better than I said it written, so I'll just read it out. I'm having a hard time putting together cognitive frameworks, spiral dynamics, integral theory, etc., and embodied frameworks, bioemotive, bioenergetics, somatic experiencing in my life, and informing my life choices. How do you suggest one at a daily and weekly scale implement integrating both sides?
Both sides? You mean the integral model and what other model are you?
I guess I mean like kind of cognitive things, like when spiral dynamics makes me like think and analyze the world and myself. It's all kind of in my head better. But embodied frameworks like bioemotive and bioenergetics is all about the somatic aspect of it and the emotional aspect of it and that kind of.
How do you integrate the head and the heart, so to speak? Or the I mean I'm that's a reductive reframing of what you were saying, because I think spiral dynamics is describing movements in in developmental movements and evolutionary movements and that kind of thing. And then there's that's all very interesting but then there's the body and what do you do with your body and I don't know. Yeah. I think you just play around with what works for you. Like you just one thing my friend Alexander says, it's a bit crude perhaps, but he says you have the people who are in the head and other people are in the dick, right? So that the head people, they're hyper intellectual people and they love all these frameworks, but what they probably need is they need somatic work. They need to become embodied. Whereas there's other guys who are women, I should say, men and women who are very physical and very they're in their bodies a lot. And they that's just fine. But if they wanted to grow, they would probably study something like spiral dynamics or go into the more abstract, go into the head more. And the spiritual people, the New Age spiritual people, are always saying, oh yeah, get out of your head and into your body. And then the more Asperger autistic types are always being extremely theoretical and abstract about everything and are distrustful of any kind of somatic experience. So I think I think it depends, like it depends on who you are. It depends on what you need to grow and evolve, right? Like there's no answer to that question. It's deeply contextual.
Then if I could I ask specifically for you, when you recognized that this was a value, how did you implement it into your life? Like I guess it's that translation step from like, okay, this is something. I need to balance and integrate and do all these sides. I'm having a hard time then translating that into like, well, what are my actual life choices and my habits? And
well, I studied literature, so I read a lot of literature when I was younger, and at one point I thought like, okay, I'm not that good of a thinker. I'm more of a, I'm I wrote songs and I was into the art world, but then I started reading philosophy because I told myself I have to become a more clear thinker. That was one thing that came to mind. And I need to do somatic practices all the time. I need to do physical practices. I need to do physical work just because of who I am, just because otherwise, my head starts to spin and I know I'm on another planet and I can't function in the world. So I need to ground myself physically. So I do a lot of, yoga and kind of things because I need this physical. I need to make the physical connection to my body, otherwise I'll drift off into space. So I'll become very disembodied easy. Other people are, my wife's very natural. She doesn't need to do physical things that much. She's very embodied already, and so for her it's a whole other story. And I'm sure for you it's a if you're a programmer, you're probably sitting in front of a computer all the time. So the best thing you can do would be go into nature a lot and do physical things. Use your hands, touch things, and so that you don't become this disembodied brain. Does that make any sense? Does that?
If you're willing to share, I'd love to hear other examples than yoga that you do. Also.
Other examples? Well, I guess I needed to play a lot of guitar when I was younger because I had a lot of feelings that I couldn't express, propositionally. I wanted to. That's an embodying experience, doing some kind of music. Yeah, cooking. I learned to do a bit of cooking over the COVID crisis because I was in this house the whole time. So I worked on cooking. Using your hands is very grounding for intellectual types, probably. Yeah, and meditation has been something I've done since my 20s that I actually can't function without doing it. I need to do it. So it's just like eating for me, right?
Meditation for some reason feels cognitive to me more than emotional or embodied.
Yeah, it can be sterile if you don't connect it to. I understand that it can be sterile if you don't connect it to the heart. If I could be so prosaic. Perhaps that's what drew me to Vajrayana in a sense, because Vajrayana there's a big emphasis on emotionality, actually. Yeah.
Those are practical suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last question, student of movement, David.
Yeah, so I want to. Nick was asking about Vajrayana before, and Tantra has been a recurring and a recent topic in your podcast, Sweeney, or with Alexander Bard. Sorry, and I'm wondering if you see like what the future of Tantra will look like in general, but also with like secular religion, and if it will remain esoteric or hidden rather than mainstream. And I guess with specifically regards to Vervaeke and his religion is not a religion, do you think there's a way to like extract it out of any of the specific religions and have it like a psychotechnology? Because people have been inquiring about tantras in like if Christians can use it or whatever.
Yeah, it's a tricky subject because in a way Alexander has this term called the Bard Absolute, and people should do tantra behind closed doors. But that doesn't mean it's because it's some kind of there's some kind of trick to it or something, or that it's all sexy and because again, I think there's certain people who are tantric types and other people who aren't, and I think it's something that becomes very easily corrupted. So probably one shouldn't even talk about it, but if it's done properly, it's probably done in a setting that is closed. That's my guess. And again, I don't want to put myself forward as an expert on tantra at all. And the other thing I sort of notice is that people think it's a good way to get laid or something, and that's a big reduction of what it is, and not necessarily the true spirit of it either. So more like I can only tell you what it's not, and that you study the good tantric teachers and get a good basis in it, like Chogyam Trungpa or somebody like that, who was pretty solid. So I don't know. I don't think it can be extracted and made into some kind of technique that you can just use to in some kind of a cheap way. At least it wouldn't be what I consider to be tantra. It might be something. It might be maybe what Osho called neo-tantra. He called it neo-tantra. Neo-tantra, he called it because he thought that Westerners were sexually repressed and had to do a lot of experimenting with sexuality, and maybe that's fine. I don't know that much about it, but I would call that neo-tantra and not tantra proper. So I'm sorry if my answers are kind of vague. It's a hard thing to talk about somehow. I don't know why that is, but maybe because it's dangerous. That's the first thing they say you should say about tantra, is that it is actually quite dangerous and that you don't want to mess around with it. It's like a dangerous psychotechnology, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've some analogies I've liked are like it's like a power drill, as opposed to well, I can't remember the other analogy, but anyways, thank you.
Yeah, Trungpa says it's like honey on a razor blade or something like that.
Well, this has been fantastic. You've been very generous with your time. And is it too greedy to ask for a song?
I'm not gonna. I'm going to refuse the song right now because
Okay.
I don't think I have the sound set up properly, and if I play you a song, I want to do it right. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna bow out from singing a song. But I've got a bunch of songs which I put on my YouTube channel, which are actually versions of stories from the Book of Genesis, which I put to I made them kind of like folk songs. It was an experiment, actually. It was an experiment in trying to. I wanted to know if I could do what Jordan Peterson did in a song. If you've listened to Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures, which I thought were the most interesting, part of his work, is that he took the Book of Genesis and he took those biblical stories and he made them into he described them from a psychological point of view, and I wanted to know if I could put them into a song, not quite like gospel music and not even with any kind of theistic or religious sort of, because a lot of gospel music is very like the good stuff is not, but manipulative. But I wanted to see if I could make those stories come alive in a song, and I don't know if I've been successful or not. But if you want to check them out, I put them out on my YouTube channel, and maybe if I get a good sound thing going here, I could share them. But without the proper sound, I'd rather not, if you don't mind.
Oh no, that's fine. It's just a good excuse to have you back one day too for that. I mean, it'd be interesting to have you sing and then talk about your songs. That would be a really interesting.
That would be cool. That would be cool. And if you give me a bit more time, I could I need to rehearse a bit and remember the words and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming by. I think we've all enjoyed your discussions with John, and having the opportunity to talk has just been great.
And I have a conversation with John and Zach coming up soon, and I have another conversation with John and Alexander Bard coming up soon, which should be quite wild.
Yeah, I listened to some of your prior conversations there too. That's an interesting topic all on its own. So thank you so much, Andrew, for being here, and thank you everyone for your great questions and for listening, and Tyler for helping with the recording. And we've got some great Q&As coming up. We've got just booking Jordan Hall probably later this week, and Chris Matro Pietro for hopefully this weekend. So stay tuned for that. And tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern, we've got a shadow dance, ecstatic dance party. So everyone please come back later tonight for that to try some sort of meditative type dancing. Sorry, So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sorry, I've got to fix my sound. But yeah, sorry about that. Yes, thanks again. Thanks again, Andrew. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Take care, everybody.
And yeah, thank everyone for being here. That was great.
Thanks for organizing this.
My pleasure.